The Witcher and Legally Blonde have nothing in common. If that's what you're thinking, you're wrong. Sure, one's a dark fantasy about a monster hunter navigating moral ambiguity. The other's a pink-soaked comedy about a sorority girl at Harvard Law. But strip away the aesthetics and they both show what happens when you respect a character's voice versus when you don't. I've read all the Witcher books. I've also rewatched Legally Blonde more times than I'll admit, and after nearly a decade in marketing, when I see adaptations fail, I don't just see bad writing, I see bad packaging. So today we're breaking down what voice actually is, how changing plot can quietly corrupt theme, how some characters survive bad writing while others don't, and what this means if you're trying to write and sell your own stories without gutting them in the process. 7 components make up a story, which might sound like a lot, but if you clicked on this video, you can probably recognize them. These are story, plot, narrative, world building, character arc, voice, and theme. Each of them is important because they make up a piece of the puzzle that is a work of fiction. Story is what happens in chronological order. Plot is the cause and effect of why it happened. Narrative are the POVs, order, and tone of how the story is told. Character arcs is how someone changes or refuses to across those events. And world building is the culture, history, and location context that makes it feel real. These 5 are fully in your control. You decide what happens, why it happens, how it's framed, where it takes place, and who your characters become. Voice and theme are different. Theme is the underlying message or idea, and while you can guide it, audiences will ultimately discover it for themselves. Voice is really delicate. It's a distinct personality and style, like the tinting on a pair of sunglasses that colors everything you see. You can set out with a plan, refine it, practice it, but truthfully, voice is shaped by story events, plot structure, and narrative choices. Change any of those and you inevitably change the voice, because essentially, you're altering the events in a person's life, changing who they are, and the message to be taken from who they become. That's why voice is so hard to preserve. Neglect it, or worse, alter it for shock or marketability, and what you're left with is something that looks like the original but feels hollow. So what makes a strong voice? Well, if I show you Geralt of Rivia or Elle Woods, you can probably hear them in your head. Geralt's voice, taken straight from the books, is low, scratchy. It signifies his mutations and harsh life, and when his direct, nearly monotone speech is paired with his sarcasm, it reveals a weary heart beneath his monster-slaying exterior, especially at moments of frustration or to deflect intense emotion. Elle's voice also comes from the books. Her Valley Girl accent and bubbly tone get her dismissed as a dumb blonde, but her word choices, confidence, and impulsive decisiveness constantly contradict that assumption. These voices shape our emotional connection to the characters, as they are the starting point from which we unravel who they are. The best stories, even those with tightly structured plots or intricate world building, live or die by voice. As a creator, you could start building your story from any component, but voice has to do 2 things: reflect who the character is and where they come from, and react to the plot in a way that aligns with your story's themes. Get that wrong and everything else becomes shallow, forced parts that do not really belong together. And this is why adaptations can easily fail, because changing mediums from book to screen isn't easy. Many of the best cut and reassemble things, but they do it with respect to the original theme and voice. Because when you change plot without understanding them, or simplify arcs to make it sell, you rewrite who the character is. So let's look at what that actually looks like. Because understanding where adaptations fail is how you learn to protect voice in your own work. As many adaptations do, The Witcher and Legally Blonde began as books. One with a sprawling history as 2 short story collections that resulted in 5 novels and now 2 prequels, and one as a standalone that managed to be noticed in a slush pile because of the author's uniquely pink submission. So, a little background. Andrzej Sapkowski began The Witcher in 1986 through a competition held by the Polish sci-fi fantasy magazine Fantastica. Much like the series where the dark high fantasy world was inspired by events experienced by the Polish people during World War II and tackled the varying meanings of a chosen one and destiny, the magazine was a political statement during a time when media within Poland was highly regulated by the communist government. The books are deeply rooted in Sapkowski's personal experiences with imperialism, moral ambiguity, and powerlessness, and they end, spoiler, unsatisfyingly on purpose. Geralt becomes a legend but seemingly dies in a really simple way along with Yennefer. Ciri, who is chased after for the entire series to produce the Child of Destiny, survives but leaves her world and its problems behind. Because without them, that world and its events, which are far less important than her relationships, have no meaning. For Legally Blonde, Amanda Brown had it out in 2001, and before it was even published, it had people competing for the film rights. This is largely in part because, like The Witcher, the book was heavily based on Brown's own experiences. She turned her funny letters home from Stanford Law School, submitted in Elle Woods fashion on pink paper with a furry pen, into a novel partly as a parody of law school and the people there. The book is honestly one of the few where the film is actually better. Brown's original Elle skips classes, doesn't try very hard, and is frankly kind of mean. The movie changed a lot. It humanized the uber-rich and beautiful Elle into an inspiring icon driven by passion. Not for love, but for proving herself, for the law, for lifting others up. Essentially, the film version of Legally Blonde amplified Elle's voice by emphasizing the themes the audience would connect with on a personal level. Netflix's The Witcher also tried to cater to audiences to get mass appeal. So why did The Witcher's viewership drop from 83 million views within the first season to 7.3 million with the fourth, while Legally Blonde continuously pops up on various streaming services and seems to have no end of video essays, including this one, talking about how much of a cultural touchstone it is? Well, we really need to look at who adapted them and with what intentions. For The Witcher, its first season and Game of Thrones' final season were in the same year. A series based on a wildly popular book series with a decent chunk of violence, sex, and battles to replace another similar series is a smart business move. That is, if Netflix approached The Witcher with the intention to settle it into the dark adult fantasy genre of Game of Thrones, which they didn't. They brought in showrunner Lauren Hissrich, who had no fantasy experience and made it clear she rejected the offer multiple times. Her prior work was all superhero shows, but in that genre, putting a spin on the source material is expected. The comics on which they are based have different universes, and things get retconned both in-universe and because the writers changed or they got bored. Unfortunately, The Witcher, much like Game of Thrones, has a fan base that is used to getting one set story. And excuses like everyone can have their own version of The Witcher feel patronizing. However, the number of threats this woman has had to endure because of changing things is sickening. Did she turn it into a family drama where everyone fights each other instead of a family story where they fight for each other against outside forces, even though she continued to promote each season as faithful to the books? Yes. By the time she got to Blood of Elves, the first full novel, did she use about 11 minutes of book content and fill the rest with 7 hours of original material? Yes. In altering the plot to target younger viewers who apparently prefer action to even a nugget of exposition rather than those already tuned in for the first season, did they lose every character's voice and the series became a yassified 35-year-old playing a 15-year-old ghost of itself? Yes. Is it bullshit to blame one person for 5 seasons of this while knowing there are writers, producers, and investors who allowed her to do this? Yes! The Witcher's failure is not the result of one woman. It is a bigger issue. Simplification for profit. I say this as someone who's worked in marketing a long time. When you choose a team based on prior numbers rather than qualifications and you craft pitch lines before you understand what your story is, you're optimizing for a quick strike, not long-term success. This is where we find Tomasz Baginski, one of the producers who had his own justifications for dumbing things down. He'd previously tried to promote his film Hardcore 44, a sci-fi reimagining of the Warsaw Uprising in World War II, and mentioned that during a Hollywood tour, it seemed American audiences were unfamiliar with the history. He used this experience to justify simplifying The Witcher's political storylines, claiming Americans didn't care about or value complexity. Yet The Witcher is something Polish people hold very dear. It's a story that defined fantasy as a vehicle to re-examine history for an entire country, not to mention generations of international fans. I can't imagine a single person, including the vast majority of Polish people, nodding along like, yep, they're too dumb, so don't bother. The show became bland characters involved in drama, while something mildly YA fantasy went on in the background. Unlike the books, it was not a criticism of inevitability versus choice, not about striving for autonomy in a world bent on manipulating the little people for power, money, and beliefs, or a story about how we don't get to decide how history portrays us. Just destiny. Over and over as a reason for why characters did things until the word lost all meaning. Now, contrast that with Legally Blonde. Adapted by the writing team of Karen McCullough and Kirsten Kiwi Smith, who are known for hits like 10 Things I Hate About You, Ella Enchanted, She's the Man, The House Bunny, all films directed at a similar audience. They changed the location from Stanford, an equally prestigious school, to Harvard to highlight the differences between new money and old money. With this, they turned Elle into an underdog, even though viewers likely have more in common with her classmates who jump the gun on cruelty because they assume she'll be a bitch. The other component of this team, producer Mart Plack, did Legally Blonde as one of his first films, and he's gone on to work on La La Land and even Wicked. He also started his career in entertainment law, and his portfolio shows he isn't afraid to take risks, like changing the movie's original ending. Originally, it all ended at the courthouse with Elle and Emmett kissing. They knew this was not a movie about a girl getting a guy, so they rewrote the ending around what the story was actually about. Passion. Passion for law, for life, for being unapologetically yourself. As for actors, Reese Witherspoon wanted Elle's role with her whole heart. It reflected her personal struggles in Hollywood, people typecasting her, intentionally preventing her from getting serious roles. Meanwhile, Henry Cavill wasn't the Geralt people wanted, but what we needed. He clearly had love for the source material and the broader fantasy genre. He also expressed the disappointment many fans showed with the unnecessary changes, ultimately leaving the show altogether. Look, a perfect adaptation will change things. Not everything translates to screen. Some aspects of literature also become unacceptable over time, like Ciri's father wanting to have a baby with her, or the Legally Blonde book's cheap humor about weight or race. But when you change the entire vibe of a series for the sake of a phantom audience, what follows is a breakdown of plot, which leads to totally different characters, a muddied voice, and ultimately the theme becomes reheated leftovers. And not the good kind. It's flayed, rebattered, and refried so that everyone will try this pretty crispy skin and choke on the dry, tasteless flesh with a whisper of flavor that was once delicious. So The Witcher lost its depth to become palatable. It replaced perseverance with destiny. Legally Blonde made Elle better by centering relatable themes and making her even more herself. But what then about the characters themselves? Is it possible to alter a story but keep its voices intact? That depends entirely on whether you understand what made them who they are in the first place. You can change everything about a story, the setting, the ending, even entire plot points, and still keep a character's voice intact. Or you can change almost nothing and lose it completely. So let's look at how Netflix stripped Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri of everything that made them who they were, and how Legally Blonde made Elle Woods more herself. From the start, Netflix's adaptation had issues. The first episode was adapted from the short story A Lesser Evil, originally a slow burn central to Geralt's character. It positioned him as someone unwilling to commit any evil, but who commits a lesser evil to prevent something horrific from happening that if he'd waited 5 minutes wouldn't have happened anyway. In the show, it fails to really set up anything. Geralt suddenly knows without explanation what is going to happen because they cut all the hints for some cheesy dialogue or to follow other characters. The message became, I don't know, if a girl wakes up before you, maybe don't butcher her friends? Without the moral foundations of this episode, Geralt's voice, his cynicism, his philosophy, his reluctant compassion disappeared. He just becomes an edgy bully. But it really gets worse when you look at how the show handles the family dynamic of Geralt, Yen, and Ciri. The three are supposed to believe they're unlovable. Geralt because he's a mutant, Yen still sees herself as an unlovable hunchback, Ciri believes anyone who loves her dies. They're struggling with inner demons, and when they come together, there should be understanding. Not, daddy is broody, mommy is moody, and baby who fancies some teenage rebellion makes three. In the books, Geralt wants someone to pass Witcher knowledge to, but he knows that's impossible. The way to make Witchers was lost. In Season 2 through 4, the show turned him into a reluctant dad, belittling Yennefer's desire to be a mother, acting like he's been baby-trapped by destiny. When Geralt meets his mother in the books, he realizes that destiny bringing them together is meaningless because he wanted nothing to do with her, or her notions that she had no choice but to abandon him because destiny said so. The forces of fate are represented as second to his personal connection with Ciri, because destiny is bullshit according to the books. We do have a choice. But in the show, his meeting with her is just dialogue about how he should respect destiny, which makes the edgelord suddenly care about her? Yennefer in the show also doesn't make sense. In the book, she's ruthless, ambitious, straightforward, a fashionista who doesn't hold back what she thinks unless it benefits her. She's a fully formed woman who knows herself. The show turned her into a YA heroine who flip-flops between fuck the patriarchy, willing to kill her lover's adopted child for magic, and thinking she could be a mother to another actress close enough in age that they could be sisters. When Yen has her powers taken in the book, it's temporary, and she refuses to help people who want to hurt Ciri. But the show version does it because she barely knows her, which does kind of make sense. However, her retroactive desire to be a mother to her is wishy-washy emotion that feels insincere. Yen in the books is not a bad person, but she definitely isn't a good one either. She says she doesn't want to suffer for others and is told, no one wants to suffer, but that is the fate of each. It's not about enduring the suffering, it's about how you endure it. And in the show, how Yen deals with her suffering shows her to be an immature, short-sighted young woman. Ciri in the books is also drastically different. Not only is she much younger, but her personality is really strong and she hates being a princess. She even met Geralt the first time after running away from an arranged marriage. In the book, she isn't the child of destiny, people assume her child will be, so they kept pressuring her into pregnancy. Ciri consistently resisted those who sought to control her. She never wanted to be an empress or a political figure. She wanted freedom, inspired by Geralt's independent lifestyle. Her arc is really about subverting the Chosen One trope and achieving personal freedom. There's really little to say about the show Ciri. Instead of an anti-hero who sometimes makes you angry with her teenage decisions but who is a complex, good person, we got book scenes out of context, leading her to be utterly forgettable beyond their forced Chosen One purpose. Look, the books don't shy away from anything. Essay, violence, emotional cruelty, but never once do the main female characters feel weak or forgettable. Simplifying Ciri and Yennefer into YA-level dynamics degraded them, losing all depth in pursuit of Hollywood fake complexity. Even the side characters were gutted. Eskel, a beloved character and kind mentor to Ciri, was turned into a brooding fuckboy who died in the same episode he was introduced. Cahir, a complex villain in the books, a young soldier following orders, a symbol of how imperialism turns people into tools with the redemption arc protecting Ciri, became a generic bad guy. All of them, from main character to supporting, are throwaway characters because apparently destiny is everything. The result was characters losing agency. And when characters lose agency, they lose voice. Because voice is more than how a character talks. It's the choices they make and why and how they make them. And if destiny makes all the choices, the characters become puppets pushed into whatever corner the writer forced them into. Now, for Elle Woods, Amanda Brown's original novel has her live up to every catty, can't-be-trusted stereotype of the dumb blonde sorority girl. The movie actually stands in strong opposition to this, showing women can be bubbly and strategic, girly, and strong. What changed? Well, in the book, Elle constantly judges everyone, even innocent bystanders. She internally mocks a guy's acne, describes someone's hair as having the texture of a Brillo pad, calls out people for their weight, their fashion, and if they're blonde enough. In the movie, Elle helps people. She helps Paulette get her dog back and find confidence. She bonds with Brooke over being underestimated. She even becomes friends with Vivian, who humiliated her because Elle doesn't hold grudges. Book Elle makes out with Warner behind Sarah, Vivian in the book's back. multiple times, including naked on a sofa. Then Elle and Sarah become friends, and Elle just never tells her. The novel ends with them sitting on that same sofa talking about Sarah's newly dyed blonde hair, completely unaware of Elle's betrayal. In the movie, Elle rejects Warner. She realizes she's outgrown him. He's mediocre, got into Harvard because his dad made a phone call. And Vivian becomes her friend through mutual respect. These changes saw the book's Elle isolated, cynical, viewing everyone as beneath her, molded into the movie Elle whose kindness is her major strength. And then there's even how it all ends. In the book, Elle knows Chutney is guilty because she's a brunette. She doesn't use legal knowledge or observation, she even sabotages other students and dates a professor for career advancement. The novel ends with Elle still hating law, still viewing everyone with contempt. She wins, but she's the same mean girl she was on page 1. In the movie, Elle doesn't suspect Chutney until she sees her perm wouldn't have survived a shower, something only someone with Elle's specific knowledge would catch. She helped corner the pool boy into admitting his affair with Brooke was a lie through her attention to detail, which we see throughout the movie. And the endings is with passion, courage of conviction, and strong sense of self that we take our next steps into the world, was written with the purpose that this Elle didn't exactly change, rather she became more herself. These changes gave Elle a journey. The movie's obstacles forced her to prove herself and choose integrity over shortcuts, and through these choices, her voice became empowering instead of toxic. There's really little Legally Blonde actually kept from the original book, so it's not like The Witcher couldn't have also survived with major plot changes. The difference comes down to the fact that The Witcher made characters serve the plot. Geralt went from a philosophical loner searching for purpose to a boring douchebag whose only interesting qualities are leather and a big sword. Yennefer's self-assuredness became wishy-washy. Ciri became forgettable. Legally Blonde made the plot serve the character. Elle wins because of her specific skills: fashion knowledge, attention to detail, and genuine care for others. The obstacles are tailored to force her to grow, not to strip away what makes her unique. And this is what separates an adaptation that honors its source from one that guts it. Understanding what makes these characters who they are and either protecting that or improving it. Which brings us back to the question every writer faces. How do you get someone to want your story without undermining what makes it worth wanting? Because packaging should exist to serve the completed work, not the work to be condensed to fit into the packaging. But how do you do that? Well, it all starts with a question of price. How much are you willing to pay for someone to like your story? I don't mean money, I mean your sanity and integrity. In the Witcher series, there's a short story called A Question of Price. It's about what happens when you make a deal without understanding what you're giving up. And as writers, we all face this deal eventually. After the writing, the beta readers, the editing, we reach a point where there's nothing left but shelving our work or trying to get someone to want it. An agent who pitches to publishers or production companies, self-publishing or short film. Whatever the path, you're translating your work into something sellable. And unlike A Question of Price, you are responsible for deciding what you give up to get it out there. Of course, there's also the matter of luck and connections, but for those of us who don't have that, we need a critical understanding of the bones of our story and why someone would want to spend money on it. Because the thing is, your voice is your packaging, or at least it should be. But when people are desperate to turn their creativity into cash, they start thinking, what's marketable, what's trending, what will get me noticed right now? Stories take a long time to develop, and condensing tens of thousands of words into a pitch is stressful. But what's important is when you market to everyone, you're marketing to no one. Specificity is your best friend. People won't buy another fantasy book, they buy the fantasy book that does X differently. So let's look at how you can do that using The Witcher 3. Overwhelmingly considered the best among the games, the marketing pitch was simple: Skyrim in Game of Thrones sauce. In this way, it's specific but broad enough to attract many people who are curious about what exactly this means. And CD Projekt Red didn't lie or overpromise the game's content. It was still a dark fantasy with plenty of battles, bathtubs, and death. What they delivered in addition to this was a game filled with morally gray narratives, like accepting a seemingly simple contract that turns into a meditation on what makes someone a monster. Is it the creature killing villagers or the villagers who tortured it first? The game lets you choose and gives Geralt the consequences. The game even completely retconned the ending. Geralt and Yen don't die, and Ciri gets to fulfill the prophecy of her saving the world, if Geralt maintains a good relationship with her. They changed massive plot points, but they understood the themes that made the book so popular. Choice over destiny, moral complexity over drama, and characters are the plot. More than 75 million copies in a decade later, The Witcher 3 is still praised. Now contrast that with Netflix's The Witcher. Destiny is a beast, created by fear, created by prophecy, created by power. What really came first? These pitch lines or the script? Likely, as soon as they had the IP, they thought about how to sell it, as any smart business would. The problem is, they knew what they wanted the show to replace, and instead of crafting a solid plan for the story first, they chose a team based on prior numbers rather than qualifications. Netflix sold Destiny, a third party that becomes whatever the writers decided would make it popular, and the exact thing the book argues is bullshit. They marketed it as epic fantasy and delivered YA drama, losing the audience built into the source material. Witcher fans who wanted to follow Geralt, Yen, and Ciri, who always choose each other in a world that keeps them apart. As for Legally Blonde, it has a pretty simple pitch too. Californian sorority girl goes to Harvard. The visuals are as immediately memorable as the quotes, because the words pink and blonde are aspects that were interesting to the target audience, but were explored in the film as symbols for outsiderness and authenticity. Now, we'd have to contrast that, however, with the Legally Blonde musical. Don't get me wrong, the musical is perfectly entertaining on its own. Much like if you enjoy shows like Shadowhunters, The Vampire Diaries, or Reign, you'll probably like Netflix's The Witcher. But the musical altered Elle's voice. In the movie, Elle goes to Harvard because she studies and earns it. In the musical, she gets in because the admissions committee thinks accepting her demonstrates multiculturalism, and she appeals to their belief in love. We lose the seriousness of her effort because it doesn't feel earned. In the movie, Elle is proactive and ambitious. She proves people wrong through hard work. In the musical, Emmett has to keep her on track the entire time. She doesn't start studying until months into the semester, and only because Emmett tells her to. When she wins the case, she says, "Emmett, you're a genius!" Which basically sums up everything wrong with the musical. For example, Elle is the one encouraging Paulette to stand up to her ex and get her dog back. The idea that they were in a common law marriage is hers, and it feels like the first major win for her that comes from her growing passion for law. In the musical, Emmett is there whispering in Elle's ear, puppeting the situation, so what's actually empowering about it? His presence adds nothing. In fact, it detracts from why the audience loves Elle. At the end, musical Elle sings, "Look how far I've come without anyone holding my hand." But that's far from the truth. The majority of the movie's montages were replaced in the musical with other people holding her hand and leading her towards success. The movie made Elle more herself. The musical made her dependent, unfocused, and shallow. They tried to replicate the concept, empowerment, pink, Harvard, without understanding Elle's voice, independence, strategic kindness, earning respect through competence. The packaging promised Elle Woods, and delivered a romantic comedy about a protagonist who can't succeed without a man, the exact opposite of what the movie was about. Here's the hard truth. Most of us will never adapt our work into games or musicals. But when you pitch to an agent, a publisher, an editor, you're adapting your story for their eyes. For nearly a decade, my job has been to condense a product into simple packaging that gets people interested enough to buy in. And I'm telling you, the same principles apply. And to not make the same mistakes Netflix and the musical made, we can break down selling our stories into 3 steps. Step 1? Well, write the story. Don't craft something around what is popular, because writing can take a year or more, and what's trending now may be oversaturated and basically impossible to sell by the time you're ready. Make something with a journey in mind. Think deeply about why your character looks the way they do, why they have certain mannerisms, not just what MBTI they have, but what causes them to be the way they are. What will they become? All of this forms character voice. No matter the plot, if it facilitates the journey, it will be an honest effort. Step 2. Extract the simple but specific pitch. This is the one sentence that invites curiosity by not explaining everything. But how do you choose what to highlight? First, identify your character's core contradiction. What makes them surprising? After that, you need to find your central tension. What's the one conflict that drives your story forward? For The Witcher, Geralt doesn't believe in destiny, but destiny keeps forcing choices on him. For Legally Blonde, Elle came for a Warner, but staying means proving she belongs on her own terms. Your pitch should create a question in the reader's mind of, how does that resolve? Lastly, match your tone. The way you describe your story should reflect how it actually sounds. For Geralt, we could say, a monster hunter discovers humans, politics, and fate are far uglier than anything with claws, especially when they target a child he insists is not his destiny. For Elle, we could also say, a sorority girl follows her ex to Harvard Law and wins a murder trial using hair care knowledge, relentless studying, and the audacity to stay pink. The contradiction is the hook. That's what makes people curious. Notice both are simple, specific, and make you curious without lying about what's inside. Let's look at some bad pitches. The difference between these and the original good pitches isn't accuracy, but intent. A gruff warrior travels a dangerous fantasy world. Could describe dozens of fantasy stories. This Timu quality Geralt isn't defined by his resistance to destiny, he's just dragged along by it. And Legally Blonde's bad pitch does the same thing. A bubbly blonde struggles to fit in, frames Elle as childish, possibly insecure, and generic. It turns a story about agency and self-definition into a vague underdog narrative about someone we're unlikely to connect with. Nothing here tells you why Elle is distinct, only that she's underestimated like countless protagonists before her. The voice in the original pitches reveals how characters respond to the pressure, not just the pressure itself, and that's what your pitch needs to show, not only what happens to your character, but how they handle it. Finally, step 3. Don't lie. Remember a question of price? You're responsible for deciding what you give up to get your story out there. An authentic pitch translates your themes without stating them directly. It doesn't oversell, it doesn't hide what your story actually is, and it doesn't trick people into reading something they won't like. Think about how many times you picked up a book or show and were more put off by the lie of how it was sold than the quality itself. That's what happens when you simplify the story to match a pitch instead of simplifying the pitch to invite people into the story. The Witcher games and Legally Blonde movies succeeded because they protected the voice, even when making massive changes. Netflix and the musical destroyed voice by oversimplifying to chase broad appeal. So when you're ready to pitch your story, remember, know what you're selling, know who wants it, match your pitch to your voice, not your voice to what you think will sell. Because how much are you really willing to pay for someone to like your story? Hopefully nothing. Because the moment you strip away voice to chase validation, you're not making it marketable, you're making it forgettable. Because no matter the genre, no matter the medium, a strong voice will always win out. If you made it this far, thanks for sitting with me through what happens when you protect voice versus when you don't. And if you're staring at a query letter, wondering how to sell your story honestly, ditto. That's why I'm Pickle Ditto, because whatever storytelling pickle you're in, I've probably been there too.